Well, Craig, I think you've really outdone yourself this time. That is grand, overpowering, just titanic scoring. And I was hoping to get something like this in our entries. Some splendiferous, overwhelming, just titanic kind of scope. And yet, a kind of following Beethoven's original concepts of melodicity and restraint and everything else. So I just really, really love the organization of ideas. I feel like you're making things really easy on me in a lot of ways. One thing I can't help thinking, Craig, that you could have had larger staves on these pages. Do you know what I mean? Like just make everything just a little bit bigger. This staff size just seems to be pretty small. And looking through, kind of jumping through these pages for, even looking at kind of your more dense areas here, I don't really see anything that couldn't, that is so cramped that it couldn't be larger. Do you know what I mean? So anyway, back to the top. I'm not going to get lost in, in overdoing it over your score, but just to talk about, just go straight to the evaluation criteria. Does the intro set the mood effectively? I mean, absolutely it does. If you're going to start with the heavy brass and this big chorale at the beginning, sort of post-Wagnerian, and in fact, like what style, what period of scoring is this? It's kind of hard to really pin it down, you know what I mean? Because you use a lot of, there's a lot of influences in here, like of kind of maybe older, older orchestration, say like going back to Berlioz, maybe a little bit of Weber, maybe a little bit of Mendelssohn at times, probably not that much. And then there's some things that kind of look forward to, say Brahms, and not really Tchaikovsky, but more like Mahler. Do you know what I mean? There's some parts in here that really remind me of Mahler, and there are parts that remind me of a little bit of Strauss. One thing I think that you are getting past in your impact of scoring, I feel that you don't need to set things up so much with little flurries or runs up to to the downbeat or to the emphasized note, like brum. Do you know what I mean? Let's see. There's a couple other ones here. Yeah, here we go. Brum. I mean, you don't need to do that anymore because you've scored everything so well. It's sort of like whenever we do this as orchestrators, these kinds of flurries going up to the downbeat or things like that, we're pointing a finger. We're pointing the orchestral finger at that thing, like, hey, look over there. Do you know what I'm saying? But if you have scored this with enough impact, then then the functions, the basic functions of the original material are powerful enough. Ba 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 bum. Do you know what I mean? That is powerful enough. It doesn't need brum bum bum brum. Do you know? It doesn't need so much of that, right? I mean, there's something similar in like when we have brass, kind of like drum drum. But I think in this instant you have justified this. All of these things that rolls into the downbeat and so on. You've justified those in just the ingenuity of the scoring and everything else. So I'm just thinking, it's like I'm not saying that like, oh, this is in bad taste or obvious or anything like that. I'm just saying that I think that you as an orchestrator have kind of gotten past that. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like a cinematic little hook, right? And you don't even need to do it anymore. If you're scoring at this level, what do you need to do that for? You don't. You're good enough, right? So yeah, so let's go back to the beginning. I said I was going to stop blabbing about this piece, but then I went ahead and blabbed about it. It's a confusing day. All right, so starting off, setting everything up, heavy brass, you got your bass trombone and your tuba kind of grunting on those low Fs, and you've got this big, beautiful, juicy, all of the colors are the same, right? Everything is, trombones and trumpets, like each in their most optimum registers for this kind of stuff. It just like has a beautiful, bright, brassy kind of a sound. And you've given the melody to the first trumpet, and that works really, really great, right? So I would say, considering how like you're bringing in very juicy brass scoring in other places, I think that that's perfectly fine. All right, so So does it set the mood effectively? It does. The slurs are great. I like these tenuto articulations here. I think that all works really, really nicely. Okay. So no comments there. Let's go on to the next part. Does the melody start with elegance? So here you do something really beautiful. You put first clarinet below the first violins an octave, and that's a trick that I've seen before. We also see like the middle C being played by first horn, and then when things go to octaves, we've got this doubling right in here, which is also just really beautiful, especially when you consider how much motion you've got in your middle strings. That it really anchors things down without getting in the way, right? And then like pizzicato basses, right? It's all perfect. Like you could have. Could have done like a little bit of like say like staccato contrabassoon on these two Fs, and then staccato bass clarinet on these other pitches, just like really soft, like I would say, like scaled down to say like pianissimo, right? So if you had wanted to make this a little bit more tiptoeing down here, but it doesn't bother me. It is scored very, very nicely. So does the melody start with elegance? Yes. Is there a natural flow to this? There is. Now I think that this whole sort of da 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 da, I think that this sort of like slurring each pair of notes is, it's a little less smooth than you think, right? Because it sort of has a kind of a way of kind of flicking off the end of the the end of each slur with so many in a row. Do you know what I mean? There's kind of like a so like if you wanted this to be less kind of pacing sounding, maybe even getting to the point of being pedestrian, you might want to just slur by the beam group. Do you know what I mean? And I think it would end up working just as well, if not smoother, right? Now here you kind of go against you sort of go against the kind of rhythmic pattern a little bit in your slurring. Like you slur into the downbeat, and then so like I think if you're really going to go ta 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 ta, it just feels a little, I mean I think that if you're going to really do this ta, then you should do it ta ta or ta. But I think it's a little. I mean, if you're gonna do da 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 da, you might as well just keep going like that way. Up down up down. Do you know what I mean? I like matching up the way you match up the slurring in the clarinet, horn, and first violins. That's really nice because it'll just have a beautiful sense of articulation and nuance. All right. Okay. Now. So is there a natural transition to octaves? Yes. Do you expand without clogging up? Yes, pretty much. You just watch out for the fussiness of the way that you pair the slurs. All right. So now the next thing is, do you contrast with the theme in your leggermente? And by the way, I'm starting to see people leave out the leggermente marking, the original one from Beethoven, put it back in. Like, I don't feel we have permission to leave it out. That's my opinion. It conveys something to the player of a certain kind of nimbleness, a certain kind of adeptness and cleverness and fleetness of foot that might not be applied if we didn't leave it in, right? It's like it's extra, and especially if you're going to have like a situation like this where you have legato over or slurring over the top group or top pair of instruments, and then none on the bassoon. I think they would both need to be marked leggermente, right? So that they just really, that like the bassoon is just really kind of matching. It's sort of like da da ba 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 ba, right? So just absolutely needs the leggermente marking. Okay, and playing this in sixths. That's very cool. Answered by a single bassoon, and then here we, the harmony sort of changes things around, right? But it's still very, very cool the way that it works. the let's see, that's so oboe and first flute playing in octaves here, and then the clarinet sort of looping around and then under. It's so cool. And then just like imitating these thirds on top with the first oboe. So yeah, that's all very, very cool. And yeah, so very wise. Yeah, first clarinet, keep it in the first clarinet still, right? So just good choices there. So yeah, so I feel that this, that there's a nice, like, you don't really contrast between the lines because you do bassoon twice and flutes twice, but just adding more weight, more string weight. And then, does there need to be any harmonic support? You just add a little bit of punctuation here to what's going on in the bassoons or bassoon. So yeah, so that's all good. So now we're going into the, emphatic color of line. Oh yes, you've got that in there, right? So first flute doubling first violins. Here you could have gone a duet, I think, with just to really have a nice firm, like especially going down into these. You're going to get all the way down to B here. I think a duet flutes helps keep the line more. Just more intense, and if you really want the line to be intense, then the oboe should come in here, right, and do a little bit of doubling. So yeah, but I mean the way that you've got it all set up, it actually works pretty well. First clarinet doubling the second violins, and this is kind of interesting the way you've got this little da 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 da. I would be tempted to swap these positions. Like, I mean, you want to keep, like here, you want to keep the function of your first clarinet just completely doubling the seconds. But the thing is, the clarinets are listening to each other, and the second is tuning to the first, and it's easier for them to tune if they're the lower player, right? So you might want to swap this around, even if it's giving the second clarinetist the melody for just a little bit. Yeah, I think that's a better solution. And then, then the whole question of, is there harmonic density leading forward to the little chorale section, right? So it absolutely is. So like while I've mentioned all of this, you've got your violas sort of chonking along here on these triplets, right? Some of that is reflected in the second clarinet part. We've got this sort of reach up a seventh here in your bass clarinet. That takes the pressure off of the first bassoon, right? So it's just easier to state that, and then you don't even bother stating it in your cellos. Although I think, it wouldn't hurt if you went divisi here with your cellos, and then just had the upper group play in unison along with the bass clarinet right in here. So yeah, but it's not hugely necessary. The way that you wrote it is pretty clear. All right, so now we get into do you maintain the strength? You're pushing forwards to mezzo forte, which is really, really nicely. I don't know if I'm so convinced by the diminuendo here, but it did, it sounded nice. It sounded nice in the mock-up, and it looks nice on the page. I mean, that is really nice, isn't it? Then da 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 da. Yeah, so it just kind of makes the downbeat into a bit of an accent, doesn't it? Yeah. Da da pow. So yeah, it's a nice pattern with your dynamics here, and then just like the little bit of rumbling thunder in the background, right? And a touch of bass drum. Yeah. So I mean that's all just really solid scoring. So what you are doing here with a variation of the dynamics, I totally see it. Is like you have the contrast is in the pressure, is in the dynamic pressure. It's not in the color of the instruments. The color of the instruments provides the dynamic pressure. So yeah. So this is just one little thing. Like every once in a while, you throw in a really low note on your bass clarinet, amongst a sort of more regular kind of layout. So just be careful because this note will really stand out. Okay. And I mean, you can even hear it in the mock-up. Not that should make all that much of a difference, but yeah, just to point that out, just really very, very clear kind of a low C sound there, a low sounding C. Okay, and then this ends. This is a nice tutti chord at the end. All right, so now. Da 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 da. I think you should say soli here, and I think you should also say soli on the cellos, right? So that they really are playing just a big, beautiful, aggressive unison, and nobody has the idea that they are subsidiary to anybody else, because that way, the intensity of the cello sound will really, thicken these horns, especially in the first bar, right? That's what you want. You just really want it to be nice and beefy, all right? Yeah, and then just da-dum. Da-dum. Merg. My second screen does not want to cooperate. There we go. Yeah, so complementary timbre. I mean, it kind of clarinet stacked with bassoons. It just kind of doesn't matter, because what you don't want is complementary. You want contrasting, right? So that you don't distract from this sort of snarly sound right in here. I mean, not as snarly as if it were stopped, but yeah, it's almost cuivre, really. Just the way that you have set it up with your string patch, your horn patch right in there. Yeah. Yeah, and this is a really lovely touch right here. The flutes and oboes floating over the top. Da 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 da, and then you've got this ba 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 da 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 ba da ba dum ba dum. It's a really nice, ingenious solution of getting around the whole problem of the patterns providing some difficulty. Like, you do get into the dovetailing that I mentioned in my my guide for or my set of cautions for this. So I feel that's just really reasonable there. And then going to the bass clarinet and the piccolo like this, that's so fun. Yeah, and and this is all really good. Expanding, I would say. Okay, I'd do I almost feel like everything should be the same dynamic here, because these trombones are going to stand out like a sore thumb, like something else sore too, right? So just almost like you could almost go like mezzo piano. I think mezzo piano with the accent, you get the mezzo forte, and then it cools down in the middle, right? So right. Yeah, you don't need to mark it up to mezzo forte because it's got a mute on it. If that were the reasoning behind it, the mute is not going to make it softer. The player's going to adjust to the temperature of the bathtub that they're stepping into, right? So, yeah. So I would say leave the winds and strings mezzo forte and just have your brass mezzo piano. Right? Maybe you weren't getting a good solid sound out of this, but there won't be a problem. I mean, unless you really want this to be kind of snarly and more featured, then in which case that's fine. So yeah, yeah. So it's a good expansion outwards, into the fifth and sixth bar after B, right? Thinking ahead to widening the gap was one of my cautions here, and like you've got your own solution for how to deal with the energy in here, nice and restless. Yeah, and then with the piccolo and the clarinet. Did I say bass clarinet? Apologies, I meant clarinet here. Yeah, very clever. Yeah, a little bit of boom. Be aware. This will be, this kind of scoring in the bass drum has a kind of a almost like somebody doing a low raspberry kind of a sound. It doesn't have a lot of clarity, unless the drummer or the percussionist is using like hard mallets. And then you get into the pocket with it. And yeah, this is interesting how you pull back in brass and lower winds, but you push forwards with everybody else. I mean, okay. It does lighten up the texture in here a little bit. I can see that. Yeah, you're making a lot of choices that at first seem a little. I'm kind of having to think twice about it a little bit, but then I kind of do see the logic. Yeah. Yeah, so very, very satisfying. So you just keep it on. You keep it on a like a completely pushing forward kind of a thing. The players will have to sort of use their relationship to each other to a large degree, and just sort of determining where they are and how much they're going to put into this. But you balance them so nicely that I don't think that there's going to be the biggest problem for them in maintaining the right proportions going into this. So yeah, so nice, nice work. All right, so we arrive at C, big massive tutti chord right in here. Yeah, I mean, I can see you're saying forte here because the brightness of your trumpets in your perhaps in your mock-up sound. I think you could go to fortissimo here. Okay. All right. So next question. New quality of tone. This is really cool with oboe. First oboe and first horn working together. And like here you do a jump up the octave, right? And then an octave with the clarinet underneath it and the bassoon coming below. I mean, it's just some very, very cool stuff in here. Sul tasto strings with pizzicato first in the cellos and then the double basses. Yeah, yeah, really nice. And then trumpet. I'm not so sure that this is the smoothest transition between melodic elements. You're saying mezzo piano in the first trumpet. Yeah, so I mean, it'll kind of work, but there's still like the edge of the trumpet's tone is just going to be something that the players would have to work out. And I mean, you're adding a little bit of cushioning here in the strings, so that might help a little bit, but it's just going to be a bit of I mean, it's not a seamless handoff. I mean, none of these really are because you're jumping the octave, but like there's a kind of a seamlessness to them to the lyricism until we get to right around here, I think. And then this is all nice, putting the clarinets on top, right, and then bass clarinet on the bottom. Yeah, yeah, very cool. Oboe and bassoons. Yeah, just like such a beautiful color, like that. The single reeds on the outside and the double reeds in the middle with this, with pizzicato in the strings. So cool. And then the strings answer with a first violin solo. It's that first violin solo patch is really, really strange in your mock-up. Back to sul tasto. Yeah, that's all great. Then pizzicato, upper winds, kind of in more traditional positions with the piccolo on top. That all works great. And by the way, this was really cool. I forgot to mention the big trill up here and that high D. That works great. Okay, and that just leads us to like the little wrap up, right? Now, it might be a little too fragmentary the way that you've got it scored here. I think that with just so much trading off like on every single beat, there might not be as much continuity as you're getting with the perfection of your mock-up. Just like which cannot play, anything kind of slightly missing the dovetailing pitch. But I mean, I guess with the strings to sort of guide everybody and unite everybody, really what you're achieving here is just a different quality of timbre behind each of these beam groups, right? Yeah, and that's a good junction point right here, and then going into octaves. Yeah, see, I feel that's a very wise way to deal with the way that he just drops an octave there, and then keeping it in violas and cellos keeps it much more, much lighter than if the double basses are cooperating or are participating here in unison with the cellos. But it's a long time for a first bassoon just to be chugging away on this. I would, but there's a lot of stuff in here that is just really what you've scored. First class players, no problem, but it's going to take a lot of focus, right? And semi-pro, student, so on. That just really might, some certain bars might be like the challenge of their career so far, right? Or their education. So I would say you might want to do a junction here to second bassoon on this G, and then to say back to first on this G, right? So I just give that middle part right in, those middle 4 bars to the second, just to give the player a little bit of a relief. Now, I mean, a good first will have no problem punching this out, but it's just a lot, to do. Yeah, I mean, in general, your bassoon scoring is really nice. Okay, so that is our exposition, right? The first half of our sonata. So we're going to jump ahead now to the, a little too far, to the recapitulation, right? And just see how certain strategies that you used are being expanded on, reused, developed, and everything else. Just the way that this is a development, right? In a sense, or the recapitulation develops some of the material from before. All right, so so here we've got some elements that we had before. Now, just to remind everybody, let's jump back. All right, to remember what Craig did here, right? This really beautiful idea of first violins taking the melody, clarinets an octave below, with the horns joining in and so on, and these little pairs of slurs and so on. All right, so remember that, and then also remember, say, the flutes, and then answered by the bassoon, and then adding more harmony, right? And then this kind of conjoined texture of the flute and clarinet in octaves with the first and second violin in octaves, and this stuff going on in the middle, right? So let's just remember all of that, okay? So now, forwards to, oops, I keep jumping forwards too far. There we go. There's E. And it's part of it is because you have such the staff size is so small. It's hard for me to grab at a glance when the page takes just a second to justify. All right. So now, after this little ya da 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 da, so you don't have the melody in the first violins at all, but we still have this sort of pairs of slurs that we did before. So now you've got your melody in a duet horns, da 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 ba 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 bum, and then it's sort of strange, da 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 da. It just feels a little weird, especially if you're gonna go ba ba da da. I mean, why do we have different slurring? Maybe you're thinking to yourself, oh, geez, Thomas is right. I was going to do it like this. Or you're thinking, oh, geez, I forgot to make this look like that. Right? So anyway, that's fine. a lot of times I'll mention something and say, "Did you forget to do XYZ?" And then people will say in the comments below, "Yes, I forgot to do that. I'm so embarrassed." Don't worry about it. Or sometimes people will say, "No, that's exactly how I intended it to be, and what's wrong with you?" It's like, okay, sorry. Okay, I mean, it's a neat idea, no doubt, like to have this really gentle piccolo right in here, an octave above the horns, or the first horn in the melody. So, I mean, look, you just have to be aware. You can make this beautiful and sweet, and you can play this first player can be, first and second can be playing dolcissimo here and so on. But yeah, that piccolo is just like, it practically would have to be mezzo forte, I think. And I would really want this to be marked, dolce. And also, the register that this is in is just going to get completely wiped out by this in here. So if you are happy, Craig, to see this as a kind of as a timbral sweetening to what's going on with the horns, if that's what you intended, then that's what you're going to get. Okay. I would not go a on first and second here. I would have this part right here played by the third and the first, right? And then these four notes right in here work perfectly well, like this G tying or maybe slurring it with portato to this G here, right? And then having the third player and their little, duo, unison duo with the first on, in this harmonic position here on this written B, right? So I think that just works a whole lot better. And then this is all just really beautifully harmonized in here. You've made a bunch of changes, little changes here and there to the flow of the harmony, and you've got a little bit of contrary motion in parts where it didn't happen before. And I just think those things are really fun. They don't bother me at all. Of course, they're not authentic, right? If people have the notion that like changing around the harmony and changing around different things and so on is a way of being authentic to Beethoven, it can work if the change is something that Beethoven would have done. But if it's just your own particular take, that's I mean, it might sound fantastic, it might be authentic to you, but it won't be authentic to Beethoven if that was the intention. So, but don't worry about it. Like those kinds of qualifications do not bother me at all either. Okay, so like the main thing that is the difference here, right? Like once we have thought of all the things, the bass clarinet and the trumpet here and so on, just making this line really beautiful and golden on with the first horn, right? If we think of all those things, what is the most different are these triplets, right? And they're just really, really beautiful. It's so fun. I mean, that's the Tchaikovskyan part of this. It feels like there's a lot of different more modern, say post-romantic, late romantic touches in this. That would be the Tchaikovsky part, right? Which he liked to do. He liked to do the repeating triplet harmony in a few of his symphonies and ballets. Yeah, but it's just so cool the way that this all works together. So great work, Craig. All right, so now we're going to like the Leggermente, and I've got a note. Well, wait, let me go back to my earlier criterion. Building on opening material, but also returning. Right, so you did build on it, right? Okay, so then going to the next concern, which is developing material, reflecting further contrasts. So here you ended up going to strings, which I think is a nice, it's nice to kind of to bring them in where you had strings before and then winds. Here you're going brass and winds to strings, so that's very cool. And here you've got this this beautiful octave, two on top, one on the bottom, kind of a thing. Violins on top, violas on the bottom. And then same exact idea, slurs and then single notes, and then just a little bit of double bass on the bottom. That's really great. And then da 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 bum bum bum. Then here we bring in like fattening or sweetening of the string tone with oboes and clarinet. I don't know if you need to go a duet there, doubling the violas. I mean, it'll work fine, but yeah, it might be a little much. Yes, sorry. I mean, that could be a duet there in the bassoons without hurting anything. Okay. I mean, especially considering how you're just sort of piling on a little bit mezzo piano, crescendo, and so on. So yeah, with the crescendo, you take away the hammer blow here, right? Because the players will be thinking of, oh, mezzo piano crescendo, and this will be mezzo forte with a little bit of a push, and then I'm at forte, right? Maybe it could just be mezzo piano, and then pow, da 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 da. Do you see what I mean? So just like, maybe take away some of the gradualism. Yeah, and this could be played. This could just simply be played as a sixth, but I would want to mark it non-divisi anyways. All right. Okay, and now remember before we had kind of a mixed, we had mixed winds and strings, kind of more direct. But here we've got this real massive tutti kind of a thing pushing forwards to fortissimo with the poco ritardando, right? Now, your poco ritardando ended up being a pretty molto-ish in the mock-up, right? My big concern here, which I'll say now before I get into the orchestration, is just basically that you've got this da da da, and then you go back to the tempo, dun dun, bum bum bum, dun dun. Just speaking of tempo, all right. Just one thing I wanted to mention at the beginning, and I forgot to, is that it's really surprising how this can be slower than most of the entries, like at 104, right? And still not sound slow. Right? There were a few that were up to 138, which is, by the way, is not a ma non troppo. That is just, that's just allegro or even con brio, considering the 16th note passages, right? So, yeah, this is a really good tempo. This 104 is a really good tempo for the arrangement that you put, and it's just like it really makes the lines a lot cleaner to have them a little slower. So if you do get this played, Craig, don't let the conductor talk you into rushing it, like to taking it up to 108, 112, 116. Right? Just leave it at 104. It's a fine tempo for this. Yeah. All right. So anyways. My feeling is like you've got this slow thing, and then you got the odd tempo. It just feels like the wind and brass tutti stuff in here should be like slow, fast, right? That's what it feels like to me with the way that you set this up. So, anyways, that's just what I felt in there. Yeah, and wow, just such an active timpani part right in here. Yeah, this is all really fun, that push there on the C and so on. Yeah. All right, so, once again, octave first and second violins. We got a duet flutes with the piccolo on top, and then the flutes jumping up to join them. Okay, and then here you got your oboes descending in octaves and then jumping up. I think that you could jump up here at the F. Okay. I think going all the way down to D in a crescendo, it's a little honky. And then here the a duet clarinets. Yeah. So I mean, it is a really powerful, direct, intense tutti, the way that you've got it. And then I love these repeated notes here. In your middle to lower strings. Yeah. I mean, that's just all so nice. And then, of course, you've got your blaring brass right in here. And then this all works fine the way that you've got it all scored. Yeah. I mean, you've got so much harmony here in the brass and the winds. You might have just might as well have almost just gone to straight octaves with your, with your upper strings, and maybe even with violas in there too, just going bum bum bum, and the bass is going bum bum bum, or the lower strings. Right? Just because like a lot of these harmony notes nobody's going to hear at all, anyways. Right, so the more you spread it out with divisi, or even with non-divisi, if it's manageable, you're never going to get the string sound that you would if you just play direct octaves with this kind of fat, chonky winds and strings kind of in harmony. Oh, sorry, winds and brass in harmony. So this is, but anyways, the scoring here is fine, no problems. I like the contrast with the the lower winds, then the big wind and brass tutti, and then the push forward and the timpani and so on. All right. Maybe it's a lot of them in a row. Like 3 in a row is as much as I would want to do, right? So anyway, and then done, done, done. Maybe this doesn't have to start forte. Do you know what I mean? Because you're gonna just end up softer. If you look at, I guess. Yeah, in this E section. Yeah, Beethoven doesn't really need this to be loud in his piano part. I don't think you really need to either, because you have all of this fortissimo, piano, forte, forte, piano, forte, piano, forte. Maybe you could stay a little softer for a while, right? Because you're just gonna bring things back up to louder again, right? So maybe you need a little bit more. Maybe you just need to just ease up a little bit there. Yeah, da da da, bum. Nice soft tutti here, just keeping it in the background. You don't keep going back to these kind of big chunky chords, and then da 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 da. So all right, so my advice here is don't do an a duet up there, right? So just especially going up to that high B flat, I think it's you get this big, beautiful, clear, intense sound from a single trumpet up there. Do you know what I mean? And you might want to just not even do the slur. Did you notice in your mock-up how it was kind of smearing the slur? That's not exactly what's going to happen in trumpet playing, but I don't know if it'll sound smeary, but it's just imagine ba 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 da da dun da dun dun. I just think that it's just you want that splash in the face. So you know what I mean? And I can see too, once again, just you sort of justify going to a forte because you want you want to get up to this B flat nice and convincingly, you know what I mean? Yeah. And you don't want to drown everything else out around it. So, I mean, okay, fine. And then we've got this, I love these trills and the flutes. They're really not going to be audible to the round right here, a little bit, and then a little bit, and of course much more when you get to this D. Yeah, and then I mean, do you need to push up to that and come back down again? I don't think you need to. I don't think you need to point at it. Just score it. You're going great. Everything's going great. You could have just trilled all the way to da 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 da. Yeah, bum 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 bum. Yeah, just nice, so nice. Yeah, and then I mean, just kind of the same before. Previous approach might be the only workable strategy. Of course, you do make some changes, but there's some general things that are the same. And you open up, you develop and progress the energy and the texture, just as I suggest, and kind of far beyond anything that I did there with these, with this kind of timpani. Bum bum bum. It's really nice. Ba bum. Ba da da. That's great. And then just right in here. So score this in 2 voices. Don't put a tie in the bottom here. and that's all good right in there. Yeah, just my only concern is whether or not like the piccolo is going to get to be too piercing on these high Fs. Yeah. Okay, but everything else is pretty cool. Yeah. Wow, that low D flat in there. This is going to be a pretty squishy note right in here. This low D flat in the timpani. Maybe a higher one would be better. Yeah, and then you got all these really cool swells, in your suspended cymbal. Yeah. Okay, and so now we get to this this part that is a recap of the C section, right? So let's jump back and remind ourselves what you did at C. So we had this kind of sort of going back and forth. We had the sul tasto, some pizzicato in the strings. We had things going back and forth, horns and oboe and so on and so forth, and jumping registers a lot, right? Okay. And then kind of coming off of it with this just back and forth as it doubles the tutti violins, and we had a little bit of solo there, right? Okay, so now, all right, so there are similar things going on here. Horns, the piccolo and the flute above. That's kind of fun. We don't have any strings. Okay, so that's a nice sort of change of pace there. Yeah, so just like I say, refresh, reboot. Elevated registers may require adjustment. So you've done a lot of that, and like the changes of different instruments. It's very cool. And then you answer in the strings. So that's nice. And you keep things from getting too hot here. That's nice. And then lower brass here. Bum bum bum. So so the winds are just supporting the strings in here. And then da 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 da. Yeah, it was just a little bit of harmonic support there. And then winds and strings, very nicely done. Pretty high violas there, but yeah, it's all fine. Da, da, da. And then we have something similar to what happened before. Flutes supporting the first flute supporting first violins, and then first oboe, the seconds, and so on. And just you really are doing it, winds to string groups, right? So just be careful that the change isn't too obvious. Going like each change of color that supports the different string instruments going to different string groups might end up being a little obvious. Like especially I'm thinking of like the going from oboe to clarinet to bassoon so quickly, but it'll be okay. And there's little bit dips and dabs of pizzicato and trumpets and horn. Yeah, this is all fine. I really like this da 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 ba 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 da da. Like, so if you're going da 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 da, why can't we use this slurring at the beginning too? Da 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 da, right? Yeah, and then da 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 dum. Yeah, so this is kind of pointing at the bass note, but I still like it. Yeah, and then we've got this da 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 da, and clarinets and bassoons. I think that's very strong, and a little bit of tuba on the bottom. Yeah, so you're using your tuba in a good way. All right, and then just like dancing up to the top with alternating patterns or alternating figuration in the clarinets, which beautiful match with the violas. You probably could have done like I'm almost thinking. I mean, these are good divisions between the different functions. Do you really want these to be separated? Like ta 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 ta, and then here you have slurs. I'm just wondering if you forgot to put slurs on. See, because like here you don't have any slurs. Here you do have slurs, but then here you don't have. I'm wondering if that was just it just would be better. I feel to slur these, to slur those parts. Yeah, and then here too in the cellos. Yeah, and then here like you really kind of keep the Yeah, I mean, okay, so I almost feel that like maybe did you run out of time or something here? I just feel like we're missing. You put a nice big tutti chord at the end. I just feel, it would have been okay. It wouldn't have hurt anything to go bum 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 with with everybody. Well, that's yeah. Just I feel the absence there, and it wouldn't hurt anything if you keep things nice and short. Tenuto, eighth notes, mezzo piano, crescendo to forte. I think you would have been fine if if you just like repeated your chord, right? And yeah, and this is interesting, timpani octaves. Okay, so yeah, so those are my feelings about the ABC as reflected in E. So now let's jump back to D. Okay, I'll also get that on my other screen. Okay, all right. So now that we've looked at all that other stuff, this shouldn't take too long. Um, so here we have some elements as before. We've got a due, flutes, and clarinet. The cellos and octaves and so on. So yeah, so like look, so long as you are really aware, like even with the flutes up here, with the way that you've got this little wandering stuff in here, that is enough to absorb what's going on in the flutes, except for their quality in adding a kind of a mysterious tone above the cellos and the clarinets in unison, right? So if you're willing to accept that these flutes are going to disappear a little bit, so you can sort of hear it in the mock-up, right? And it's a beautiful color, if you just, so long as you're willing to bear that. And then then there's some typical stuff in here. The violas and the bassoons working together is very cool. Contrabassoon and double basses and so on. Really, really nice. Okay, and then we're going to like just sort of pluck pluck, really nice. Yeah, with a little bit of a flute in there. Yeah. Yeah, and then bum ba bum 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 rim. So once again, you don't need to do this. You're good enough, Craig. You don't need to point at the downbeat. You're absolutely, you like you're scoring at a really really good level at this point. It's a really intense level. So yeah, bum ba bum bum. Yeah, so horns. Yeah, this is really going to be humongous, right? And then especially when you add the trumpets on top of that, it's just going to dominate everything. Yeah, so keeping the winds and the strings up here, almost nobody's going to hear these violas at all. But I mean, they might as well be there, working with with these lower winds and the trombones and so on. So yeah, but I mean, they could also just be up here fattening the part of what the like you could have had them play an octave lower, along like in unison with the horns, and then jump up to fatten these three notes in the second violins. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and then sul ponticello once again, clarinets, and these are all just really nicely done, just like in the parts that are similar to this. Yeah, piccolo in octaves with oboe has just such a bright sound, and then flute octaves with clarinets, same thing. Yeah, just really nice trade off back and forth. Yeah. Yeah, so here, like, I just think that the second flute right in here, you might as well just be playing. It could as well have been a duet from about right here, right? But yeah, it's just like the second flute stuff in here is just really gonna, especially once you add your oboe and your clarinet working together there, forget it. It's just the second flute down here is inconsequential, and right up here, even though you've got your piccolo, piccolo, this is middle register for piccolo. It's not the strongest. If you had your second flute up here, then I think would be way more balanced across the octaves. Yeah, and this is all fine. Yeah, and then just tremolo right in here. Yeah, extra spooky. Da 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 da, ba 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 bum. Da 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 da, ba da da da, ba da da da. Yeah, that's so cool. The back and forth here, and then here you just really go for it with with high clarinets, piccolo, these strings. I feel like some of these lower lines in here need a little bit of love, a little bit of doubling from your winds. Just like you're putting so much weight on top, and these lower lines in here just need a little fattening. Yeah, yeah, but it still sounds pretty cool. Da 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 dum bum bum. Yeah, and you're right in here. It would be nice if the bass clarinet helped out here a little bit. Do 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 boom. Right? Yeah. Yeah, considering all of what's going on here in your low brass, you just really don't need your bass clarinet helping out here at all. There's already plenty of help happening here. In fact, I would even say you could fill in the octave here between the first bassoon and the contrabassoon with the second bassoon. All right, that's just very nicely balanced. And then have your bass clarinet ready to just come in here and help this out. And then you get a beautiful, cool tone that is not going to get wiped out by everything else in support of your violas and cellos. All right, and then everything else, you know, really, really good job, Craig. I mean, in these orchestration challenges, you always sent me something first rate, and I know that it's been you have told me before, I think in some messages, just like that like that it meant a lot to participate in them, and you're just doing such a great job, and so I'm just so happy to take a look at this for you and to give you what help I can with it. And it's just so fun. I wonder, it's so flashy and so intense, and I'm not over the top, but just over the moon. Let's put it that way. and it has like so much pizzazz to it. It's the kind of thing where like it feels so late romantic, or postmodern, or sorry postmodern, post romantic, that maybe it's too much. I'm starting to wonder, is it easier to get something like this performed or read if it is perceived to be something that kind of stays more strictly to the spirit of Beethoven than something that has like a fresher is the wrong word, but has a more like a closer to modern look at the style. So I don't know. I have no idea. But man, it would be great to hear this performed. That's what I'm sort of feeling like, especially as we're getting further and further into these dotted brev evaluations, where people really spend a huge amount of time perfecting their scores, and did a lot of the work that it would take to get these pieces ready for the stands, right? So I mean that's what I really feel with this a lot. I mean, there's still a lot of work to do on this before I would hand it to the orchestra librarian, but still such a cool orchestration. So great job, Craig, and thank you for being so patient. I mean, especially after putting this much work into it, to have me sort of fizzle out there a couple of years ago. So I mean, I'm just so happy to look at it now, and you just did some great stuff here. So yeah, and we're just gonna keep looking at scores with this kind of level of commitment for a while. So sit back, everybody, and you know what to do, and that is to give Craig your thoughts below. Any suggestions, anything I might have missed, anything you might differ with me on. It's all fair game. Just give him the most constructive feedback that you can, And even if there's like, let's say that you're a beginner at this, but you just really like the score, just tell him, okay, this encouragement really matters. And so there's nothing left to do but just thank you, Craig, for sending this in, and just adding that touch to this challenge, that voice. So it just really matters a lot. See everybody tomorrow.